Good morning. This is Jane with Scraptastic Yarns Podcast, and today is May the 7th. We're in the 5th month. Yay! Yay! This is also Nurses Week. So if you know any nurses, wish them a happy Nurses Week. I'm going to tell you a little story about the hospital that I first worked at in New Mexico, Roswell, New Mexico. Our doctors decided for Nurses Week that they were going to man our shifts while we had a banquet dinner. Now, they decided they would do that because they thought, well, we don't have that many things we're responsible for. They could cover those couple of hours that we were gone for our meals. So they asked us to make a list of everything that we would be responsible for. And we did. Every little thing. Every big thing. They came back and they said, well, that's not going to work because y'all do a lot more than we thought you did. Apparently they thought we just handed out medications and left notes for them. So, yeah, they were rather surprised. In fact, one of the doctors shadowed us and he said, I can't believe you guys don't get paid more. He said he drew the line at having to change adult diapers and having to run codes. Generally in a hospital, when you run codes, it's not like TV shows. There aren't doctors standing around waiting to work the code. Generally what it is, it's a bunch of nursing staff, respiratory staff, other people who run the code, and the house mouse, or the nursing supervisor, is the one that comes around. Now, most hospitals have it's a written agreement with most of the doctors that if there is a doctor that is doing rounds and they hear a code, that they will come to that code to assist with it. That is generally not what happens. Generally it is the nursing staff, respiratory, you may have physical therapy that comes in to help. There are a lot of people on the floor that just run the code. And when I say code, that means someone who has gone into respiratory distress or their heart has completely stopped and you're doing CPR to get them back. And they were a little surprised that the list was so long. So yeah, they decided at that time they would just send us our meal for those of us that were working when the banquet was happening. So it was rather funny because, doctors assume that nurses didn't do as much as what they do. They were a little surprised at all the tasks and things, responsibilities that a nurse handles on a shift. So that was a kind of fun story. Well, let's get into some finished items. I did have one finished item that it was an item that was started by someone else, but the woman is elderly. She was having trouble with getting the count right for the rows on the front two halves of the sweater she was making. It was a size 4 sweater. So she asked me if I would do that for her. I did do that for her, and it was called a raglan sweater, and it was knitted. It was rather an odd sweater. Every piece was separate, back, sleeves, and the two front panels. But the front panel went up into almost a single point where there were only 2 stitches for several rows. And I've never seen a pattern like that. And I've knitted a lot of sweaters, cardigans. So I was kind of surprised. And one of the other gals with our knitting group, she goes, I've never seen a pattern look like that. I said, I know, this pattern is rather bizarre. It was a Mary Maxim pattern. I did finish it, sewed all the pieces together, put a collar on it, but they even wanted you to do the collar separate and then sew the collar on. I'm like, and it was considered a raglan, so I was like, not sewing the collar on, I'm just picking up stitches and gonna knit it straight on. And I will put a picture in here. And yeah, it was rather interesting. It was beautiful yarn. It was a bulky yarn, and I'm pretty sure it was Mary Maxim yarn. I don't know what the name of it was. There were no ball bands whatsoever on the sweater. So I finished it, and I'll be handing that off this afternoon. It's already in the car ready to go, so I'm not going to grab it. And yeah, if I have things I have to deliver, generally I take it out to the car so I don't forget. It's just the way I roll. The only other thing are a bunch of baby hats. You know, working up some scraps, getting those done. And that is it for finished items. I did finish the other cardigan, you know, that went to the woman. I have been, with the physical therapy, I have been doing some other things at home. And one of those was they had asked me if I had crocheted yet. And I have not crocheted yet with this arm. But I have been using the rotary cutter for making some catheter bags for the nursing home. So I have been cutting those and sewing on those, and I've got to insert the elastic that goes in them. They prefer the catheter bags that have elastic, so they go up around. It used to be you would have ties and you would tie them, but they find that those don't always stay tied. They come off. They prefer the elastic on the catheter bags for those in the nursing home. And the catheter bags serve 2 purposes. They hide that catheter bag for the client so that, you know, it's not embarrassing having that bag hanging off and hanging on your chair or whatever. But the other thing that it provides is a bit of infection control so that you have less infections, because even with, you know, just catheter bag, you're more susceptible to infections. So this is just a way to help with some of those things. Now, you know, once a month I go to prayer shawl. And of course, when you go to prayer shawl, you have to be careful because you may get chosen for the project of the month. This month I was putting my bags down and I was chosen for the project of the month. I was given this baggie of squares and yarn. I think I showed, no, I didn't show it to you last time. Couldn't have. Didn't get it till last Wednesday. Anyway, the granny squares, you know, and many times these projects come to us from someone who has, as the pastor puts it, made their transition over into heaven. And this is one of those projects. So, I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, well, there's 36 squares. They're kind of small squares, not real big. It's probably about 6 inches, maybe 5. So, it's not going to make a very big afghan. Won't make a very big shawl. Anything else. So I pulled out of my stash one of these nice things of burgundy. And I thought I would pair that with some squares made up in the burgundy. And then join them. I think I'm going to join them with black. I use black a lot for joining when I do join those. So I think that's what I'm going to do, and then do a little border around it. But that's the only other thing I have going besides my Yvette shawl. It's not going very fast. Left hand is slow. So, yeah. That is it for this portion. It's a very short one for that. But, of course, now it's time for What in Tarnation? We have a couple of cuties today. The first one is, there's controversy about the Kentucky Derby. Well, but there's also some good things that come from the Kentucky Derby. And it's the Kentucky Derby Winter Poop on sale for $200. Are you interested in a $200 jar of poop from the 1997 Kentucky Derby winner, Silver Charm? If so, the jars by Kentucky for Kentucky went on sale May the 1st. The Lexington Herald Leader reports artist Coleman Larkin is the mastermind behind the expensive crap. Sales from the Derby turds will go toward Old Friends Farm in Georgetown, a thoroughbred retirement facility Silver Charm calls home. The newspaper says supply of the resin-coated feces is limited. Larkin says the most difficult part of the creative project is asking the type of people that own million-dollar thoroughbreds if I can please have some horse turds to put in jars. Oh my. We have another one involving another animal. Wild raccoon moves into German zoo. Keepers can't expel it. A wild raccoon has moved into Heidelberg Zoo in Germany, and keepers can't keep him out. The German daily, and I'm not even going to pronounce this name, Rhein-Neckar-Zeitung, reported Friday that zoo staff recently discovered the uninvited guest inside the raccoon enclosure, where he seemed to be getting along fine with the 7 original residents. The newspaper reported that the interloper, nicknamed Fred, can expect free board and lodging for life because European Union rules forbid him from being released back into the wild. Under a 2015 EU directive, raccoons are considered an invasive alien species that might pose a threat to European plants and animals. Wild raccoons in Europe are the descendants of animals that escaped from fur farms decades ago. Fred is unlikely to produce offspring. However, EU rules dictate he'll have to be castrated. Poor Fred. Now the next one is an absolute wonderful story about the Yarny community. How a Dallas grandmother discovered a $65,000 yarn heist. You might remember Amy Glover from a couple of months ago when she caught a Craigslist scammer. Now she's back at it. What were piles of yarn doing in a home improvement store? That's what Amy Glover wanted to know. Miss Glover, a 59-year-old grandmother, was walking through the aisles of the Hampton Road Habitat for Humanity Restore a couple of weeks ago when she noticed a bin full of yarn. Miss Glover works at Habitat, which runs 3 restores in the Dallas area where do-it-yourself buffs can pick up discount home improvement materials. The restores depend on donated materials for much of their merchandise. At first, she thought she'd pick up a few skeins of yarn for her crochet club on the cheap. But then she wondered, how did this fluff, which turned out to be luxury handmade merino, alpaca, cashmere fiber, get here? Miss Glover, you may remember, is an amateur sleuth profiled in Brian's Lens a couple of months ago when she cracked a case about a Craigslist scamster who was making phony buys on the internet. She went to the restore manager, Jeff Wagner, and learned the yarn had been donated by a couple of guys who pulled into the loading dock that morning with a trailer full of yarn, who offered to give half the contents to Habitat. Wagner had no reason to believe the donation was not real. We depend on donations to keep our business alive, he says. The 2 donors, he said, did not want a tax receipt for their gift. They left with the trailer and weren't seen again. Learning that, Miss Glover's antenna went up. A coil or skein of 100 Ravens yarn retails for up to $35. Thieves, though, have nowhere to sell it. Inspecting the packaging, she found the brilliantly colored hand-dyed material came from a place called 100 Ravens in Brookline, New Hampshire. AHR had come to Dallas that week for the Fiber Fest, a convention for knitting enthusiasts. Glover clicked on the AHR's Facebook page and discovered this message from Becca Purdon, the owner. Bad news, my friends. AHR's trailer was stolen this morning from the parking lot of our hotel in Irving, Texas. In it was almost all our inventory, all our samples, display gear, flooring, register, everything. So we will be missing DFW Fiberfest this weekend. We are heading home to try and recoup and die enough to make it to our next show. We'll miss all our Texas friends. Glover called Becca Purdon, who turned out was just pulling out onto the freeway to drive back to New Hampshire, assuming she'd lost her entire business in the stolen trailer, a loss of about $65,000. Purdon, 52, was overjoyed to find that close to half her inventory had been recovered. Amy was a miracle to come along just because she got curious, Purdon told me. She was able to go to DFW Fiber Fest and recoup some of her losses. The remaining part of AHR's inventory and trailer has not been recovered, but once the fiber community at DFW Fiber Fest discovered what happened to 100 Ravens, they swung into actions. Vendors donated yarn to baskets, which were then auctioned off, earning $12,500 to help Becca Purdon get back on her feet. Texans are amazing, Purdon told me. 2 guys did something crappy, but everybody came out of the woodwork to help. Texans are my favorite people. They just know how to help, especially in such a loving and proactive way. made everything okay. It just made everything okay. Purdon guesses it will still take her 2 years to build her business back up to what it was. The upshot, though, might make a needlepoint someday. Don't mess with Texas, and don't mess with Amy. Of course, we in the Yarny community know that we're going to stand up and back someone when they're in trouble. So, yeah, there we go. Now we're going to have a few shout-outs for some other channels. The first one is the Blissful Stitch Podcast, and that is Christina. The second is Gloria James. Then we have Darby Deb, who's finally decided to jump in, and I'm glad to see that. There is Made by Mum Natalie. And then there is someone that Summer talked about this week, and that's KnittinDeb's Knook. Now, many of you also know that ClassyKim has been on all of our channels commenting, and she has decided to start a channel. And hers is ClassyKim's Crochet. And then there is also Elaine's Crochet World and More. And there is also another, Yolanda the Hooker. Now, I haven't looked at Yolanda's videos yet, but I just watched Cheryl Bolt's, and she shouted her out. She's someone who just has started a channel. So I hope that you will give these guys a chance and look them up. Of course, they'll all be listed down below. And yeah, I'll see you again next week. Maybe I'll have some progress on these squares. I'm hoping. And remember, choose kindness. Kindness is free and it's easy.